All right, so you're here because you want to learn how to
What?
handle security, right?
Yeah.
Like a pro,
Right.
even if you don't have like a dedicated CISO
Yeah.
like on your team.
Yeah.
And honestly, with all the headlines about AI companies
Mhm.
getting hit with data breaches
Yeah.
left and right, who wouldn't be
Left and right.
a little concerned?
Yeah, absolutely.
We're going to break down this CTO blueprint for seamless integration of product development and security.
Okay.
It's going to give you like a clear,
It is.
actionable framework.
It is. It's a very practical guide.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes getting security right from the start, like not as an afterthought, but
Right.
baked into like the DNA
Oh,
of everything you build.
And so security by design, but
Yeah.
what does that actually
Yeah.
look like when
Yeah.
you're building a product, especially in a
Yeah.
fast-paced AI company?
So think of it like this.
Okay.
If you were designing a skyscraper in an earthquake zone, you wouldn't just like bolt on some extra support beams after it's built.
Yeah.
You would engineer that earthquake resistance into the foundation itself.
Okay.
That's what we're aiming for with software.
Yeah.
Security as like a core structural element.
I'm getting the metaphor,
Yeah.
but how do we actually do that with code?
So automation is key here, not just for efficiency, but for consistency.
Right.
Imagine you're using a tool like Terraform
Okay.
for your infrastructure. You're essentially writing code that describes exactly how your systems should be set up, including all the security configurations.
So you're not relying on someone
They're
to
probably-
manually configure each server and hopefully remember all the security best practices.
Exactly. Terraform acts
Gotcha.
like a self-documenting, always up-to-date security blueprint.
Okay.
This reduces human error and saves you
Okay.
tons of time in the long run, which I know is
Especially when
scaling fast.
for a CTO, like you.
Yeah.
Plus, if you need to make changes, you update the code and Terraform handles the rest.
Yeah.
Consistent, auditable, and way less chance of something slipping through the cracks.
It's such a huge win.
Yeah.
What about Open Policy Agent?
Yeah.
This blueprint mentions it as a way to enforce specific rules.
OPA is incredibly powerful.
Okay.
It's like having a security guard who can read code.
Okay.
You define very granular rules, and OPA automatically enforces them
Interesting.
across your entire tech stack.
Got it.
Say you want to ensure that all data is encrypted before it's stored.
Right.
With OPA, you write that rule once, and it's automatically checked
Okay.
every time data is handled.
Okay, so this is starting to feel less like a burden and more like having a
Yeah.
super-powered security team working behind the scenes.
Exactly.
But let's talk about your developers. How do they fit into this security-focused world? We don't want to overwhelm them
Right.
with a million new tasks. Yeah, that's where the developer-centric approach comes in.
Okay.
It's not about adding more work. It's about
Yeah.
giving developers the tools and knowledge they need to be security champions
Okay.
from the get-go.
Yeah.
Imagine each developer having the ability to spot and fix security issues as they write code.
This sounds great in theory,
Right.
but how do you actually get developers to buy in? Won't they see this as someone else's problem?
You're right.
Not theirs.
It's not just about handing them a bunch of tools and saying, go be secure.
Right.
The blueprint talks about building a security guild within your company.
Okay.
It's a way for developers to share knowledge,
Okay.
learn from each other,
Gotcha.
and even compete to find and fix vulnerabilities.
Okay.
A
So
friendly rivalry, not mandatory training.
turning security into a collaborative challenge
Exactly.
instead of a chore.
Yeah.
But what about catching those vulnerabilities before they even make it into the code base? This blueprint mentions shift left security. Fill us in on that.
Shifting left is all about finding and fixing issues early in the development process.
Okay.
Imagine catching a typo in the first draft of a book
Right.
versus after it's already been printed and shipped, way cheaper and less embarrassing. for
Yeah.
instance.
That's a point I hadn't considered.
Yeah.
So we're talking about catching security flaws while the
Yes.
code is still being written.
The blueprint recommends incorporating threat modeling
Okay.
right into the design phase. You're basically putting on your hacker hat and thinking, how could someone exploit this feature?
Right.
What are the potential weaknesses?
Right.
You're anticipating attacks before they even happen.
That's a pretty cool way to think about it.
Right.
And what about tools like SNCC, which the blueprint mentions for code analysis? It's one thing to think like an attacker, but how do you actually catch those vulnerabilities in the code itself?
SNCC is like a security spell checker for your code. Okay. It scans for known vulnerabilities and bad coding practices,
Right.
giving you instant feedback as you write.
Right.
Plus, it helps you find and fix issues
Yeah.
in open source libraries, which is a big one.
Right.
Because even if your code is solid,
Yeah.
a vulnerability in a third-party component can still be exploited.
Totally.
Yeah.
Okay, so Snake helps you catch those hidden dangers that might slip through even the most careful manual review.
Yeah.
But this blueprint takes things a step further, right? It outlines 4 stages of a secure development lifecycle.
Yes.
Walk us through them.
It starts with planning and design,
Okay.
where you're conducting security architecture reviews for any new features
Okay.
and setting minimum security requirements for each sprint.
Right.
You're basically laying a solid security foundation before any code is written.
So security is front and center, not an afterthought. What comes next?
Then we move into the development phase itself. This is where tools like pre-commit hooks come in.
Okay.
Imagine little bits of code that run automatically before a developer can even commit their work.
Gotcha.
These can enforce basic security best practices,
Right.
preventing insecure code from ever entering your code base.
So it's like having a safety net for developers, catching potential issues before they cause any real damage.
Exactly.
What else can you do during this phase?
Their principle of least privilege is crucial.
Really?
It means giving developers only the access they absolutely need to do their jobs,
Okay.
reducing the potential damage if an account is compromised. And of course, peer code reviews are still incredibly valuable, but with a focus on security.
So having another set of eyes looking specifically for security vulnerabilities.
Right.
It's like having a security buddy system.
Exactly.
Okay, we've planned, we've built.
Yep.
What happens when it's time to actually launch this thing?
That brings us to testing and deployment. This is where automated penetration testing with tools like Burp Suite comes in.
Oh, okay.
It simulates real-world attacks on your application.
So you can fix things before they actually...
Helping you identify and fix vulnerabilities before the bad guys do happen.
Right. Isn't constant monitoring overwhelming? How does a lean team handle all those alerts without burning out?
You're right. We can't have security teams drowning in data.
Yeah.
That's why this blueprint also highlights the importance of prioritizing and filtering those alerts based on what poses the most significant risk to your company.
Right.
Not just reacting to every little blip.
Yeah.
It's about working smarter, not just harder.
That makes sense.
Yeah.
Prioritization is key.
Exactly.
The blueprint also mentions immutable infrastructure.
Right.
What's that all about?
Think of it like a tamper-proof vault for your system.
Okay.
Once a piece of your infrastructure is deployed, it can't be changed. If you need to update something, you build a whole new version with the changes and replace the old one.
Yeah.
It's much harder for attackers to sneak in malicious code because they can't tamper with the core blueprints.
Interesting. So it's like a read-only system, which makes it much more difficult for attackers to gain a foothold.
Right.
Okay, final stage. Operations and monitoring.
Right.
What are the key things to consider here?
This is where tools like Splunk come in.
Okay.
Imagine being able to instantly spot suspicious logins from unusual locations.
Yeah.
Or a sudden surge of data leaving your network at 3 a.m.
Right.
That's the kind of real-time insight Splunk gives you.
Okay.
So you can act fast to contain a potential breach.
Splunk sounds powerful, but I'm imagining a wall of blinking lights that no one understands.
You're right. Raw data isn't helpful.
Right.
That's why you need to focus on key metrics.
Okay.
Splunk can be configured to track things like how quickly you're detecting issues and how efficiently you're fixing them. Right. It's about turning all that data into something you can actually use to improve your security posture.
So instead of feeling overwhelmed, a CTO can get a clear picture of how well their security program is performing and identify areas for improvement.
Right.
This is great information, but we need to address the elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Many CTOs find themselves in a situation where they need to handle security without being a certified CISO. What does this blueprint say about that?
It outlines 5 key responsibilities a CTO can manage, even without that formal certification.
Gotcha.
And believe me, you can absolutely handle these.
This is where it gets really interesting for our listeners who might be in this exact position. Hit us with those key responsibilities.
All right, first up, security strategy.
Okay.
This means defining and implementing security policies that are specifically tailored to your company's needs and risk tolerance.
So you're not just blindly
following
generic rules. You're making
generic rules.
Strategic decisions based on what matters most.
You're making strategic decisions based on
to your business.
What matters most to your business.
So it's about making security work for you.
Exactly.
Not the other way around.
Exactly.
What's next?
Next is risk management,
Okay.
which is all about making informed decisions. Imagine you're deciding whether to build a feature in-house or use a third-party API.
Yeah.
How do you weigh the security implications of each choice?
Right. That's
where risk management frameworks for your computer systems. When, not if, something happens. You're not scrambling, you're executing a well-rehearsed plan.
Makes perfect sense.
If.
What about the legal stuff?
That's where compliance awareness comes in.
Okay.
You need to stay informed about relevant regulatory requirements like GDPR or APA.
Right.
And make a good faith effort to comply. You don't need to be a legal expert.
Right.
But you do need to understand the basics.
Yeah.
And make sure you're doing what's expected of you.
So it's about demonstrating that you're taking security seriously and meeting industry standards.
Right.
What about the human element?
Absolutely. Security training is essential.
Okay.
You need to make sure your engineers and all employees are aware of security best practices and know how to spot and report potential issues.
Okay.
Even the most sophisticated systems are useless if people are clicking on phishing links or leaving their passwords on sticky notes.
Right. Human error is often the weakest link.
Right.
This is all fantastic information.
Yeah.
But how do we know if it's actually working?
That's where measuring your success comes in.
Okay.
You need to move beyond gut feeling and look at real data.
Okay, so what kind of metrics should a CTO be tracking to see if their security program is actually making a difference?
There are a few key metrics to focus on. First, there's MTTD, or mean time to detect. How quickly are you finding security issues?
Right.
The faster you can spot a problem, the less damage it can do.
Gotcha.
Then there's MTTR, or mean time to remediate.
Gotcha.
How efficiently are you fixing those issues once they're found?
So you want
to resolve problems quickly.
To minimize the window of vulnerability.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
So it's like a highly trained security pit crew getting in there and fixing things fast.
Exactly.
What else? You also need to keep an eye on security debt.
Okay.
This is a measure of all the unresolved security vulnerabilities that are piling up.
Gotcha.
It's like financial debt.
Right.
But instead of owing money, you're owing security improvements.
Right.
And that can be even more costly in the long run.
Yeah.
And of course, you'll want to track your compliance score to see how well you're meeting industry standards and regulations.
Yeah.
It's like a report card for your security program.
I love that analogy.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got a solid framework for building security into every stage of development and key metrics to track our progress.
Right.
But security is not a one-time thing, is it?
You got it.
It's
a continuous process of improvement.
Our listener, always learning and leveling up. What are some ways to ensure that security stays top of mind and that we're constantly improving?
The blueprint recommends running quarterly security reviews to make sure your policies and practices are still up to date.
Yeah.
It's also crucial to foster a security-aware culture within your company. This means making security everyone's responsibility, not just the security teams.
So security becomes part of the company's DNA,
Yeah.
not just something you tack on at the end.
Exactly.
Any other cool strategies from the blueprint you want to highlight?
One really interesting idea is running bug bounty programs.
Okay.
This involves inviting ethical hackers to try to find vulnerabilities in your systems and rewarding them for their discoveries.
Yeah.
It's like crowdsourcing your security testing, but with highly skilled professionals.
Interesting.
It's a great way to leverage outside expertise to identify weaknesses you might have missed internally.
That's a great way to wrap up part one.
Yeah.
We've covered a ton of ground
Of info.
from the core principles of security by design to specific tools and tactics for building security into every stage of your product lifecycle. We've even touched on how a CTO can effectively manage security without being a certified CISO.
Right.
But don't go anywhere. In part two, we'll delve deeper into some of those powerful tools and explore how to tailor these strategies to your specific company and industry.
Exactly. Stay tuned. Yeah. Welcome back. Ready to get our hands dirty with some of the tools and tech that can make the security blueprint a reality.
Absolutely. We've talked a lot about what to do. Now let's dig into the how. Let's start with Terraform, which you mentioned earlier for infrastructure as code. For those of us who aren't coding wizards, can you break down what infrastructure as code actually means?
Sure. So traditionally, managing your servers and networks was a lot of manual clicking, configuring, hoping you didn't miss a step. With infrastructure as code, or IAC, you're writing code that defines everything.
Okay.
Imagine a script that says, create a server with these specs, these security settings, and connect it to this network.
So it's like having a blueprint for your entire IT infrastructure, but in code instead of on paper.
Precisely. And that has huge advantages for security. First, it eliminates human error. Every server, every component is set up exactly the same way, following your security blueprint to the letter.
So no more worrying about inconsistencies creeping in because someone forgot to check a box or typed in the wrong setting.
Exactly. Plus, every change is tracked in the code, so you have a perfect audit trail. If something goes wrong, you can roll back to a previous known good state. And critically, you can bake your security configurations right into these scripts. Firewall rules, access controls, it's all defined as code and automatically enforced.
Okay, that's a huge time saver and eliminates a lot of potential for mistakes. Yeah. I'm starting to see why this is a game changer. So Terraform is all about securing the underlying infrastructure. What about the code for the applications themselves? That's where SNCC comes in, right?
Right on. SNCC is your secret weapon for catching vulnerabilities in your code base. It's like having an automated security expert reviewing every line you write. It scans for known vulnerabilities, bad coding practices, things that even the best developers might miss.
So it's not just about finding vulnerabilities in your code, it's also about checking the third-party libraries and components that you're using, right?
Yeah.
Because even if your code is flawless, a vulnerability in a dependency can still be exploited.
You're absolutely right. That's a common oversight. SNCC helps you catch those hidden dangers lurking in third-party code. And because it integrates into your development workflow, you get feedback as you write, not weeks later when you're trying to ship.
I'm seeing a theme here. Finding and fixing problems early, constantly scanning for weaknesses. It's that shift-left mentality we talked about. But what about real-time threats? Once the application is live, how do you keep an eye on things? We talked about Splunk briefly.
Splunk. Think of it as a central nervous system for your security. It pulls in data from all your systems, firewall servers, applications, and gives you a real-time view of what's happening.
Okay, but realistically, how does a CTO, who's not a security expert, make sense of all that data? It seems like it could be overwhelming.
That's a valid concern. It's not about staring at a wall of data. It's about focusing on what matters most to you. Splunk can be configured to highlight specific events. For example, it can alert you if someone tries to log in from an unusual location or if there's a sudden spike in data leaving your network.
So Splunk can act as an early warning system, flagging those needle-in-a-haystack events that might signal a real attack. That's reassuring. Now let's get practical. One size doesn't fit all when it comes to security, right? How do you know which security measures are most critical for your specific company?
That's where risk assessment comes in.
Okay.
It's about identifying the threats that are most likely to target your company, your data, and understanding the potential impact of those threats. A healthcare company will have different concerns than a social media platform.
Makes sense. So how do you actually go about conducting a risk assessment? Do you need to hire a team of consultants with fancy software?
You don't need to overcomplicate it. Start by listing your most valuable assets: customer data, intellectual property, your reputation. Then brainstorm who might try to steal or disrupt those assets. Hackers, disgruntled employees, even natural disasters. Think broadly.
Okay, so you're putting on your worst-case scenario hat, trying to anticipate all the ways things could go wrong. Then what?
For each threat, you estimate the likelihood of it happening and the potential impact if it does. A sophisticated nation-state attack might be unlikely, but the impact could be catastrophic. Employees clicking on phishing links might happen more often, but the impact of each incident might be smaller.
So you're balancing likelihood and impact to figure out where to focus your efforts. This all makes sense, but it does sound a bit daunting. Any tips for making this process manageable?
Start simple. There are free tools and templates online to help you get started.
Okay.
Don't let perfection be the enemy of good enough. And remember, you don't have to do this alone. There are security consultants who can guide you, and the blueprint itself offers practical advice.
That's good to know. We talked earlier about a CTO handling many security responsibilities without being a certified CISO. This risk assessment piece seems like it would fall under that, right?
Absolutely. A CTO is perfectly capable of leading a risk assessment process. It's about being strategic, understanding your business, and making informed decisions about where to invest your resources.
So, good news for all the CTOs out there wearing multiple hats. Let's talk about compliance. It's one thing to have security measures in place, but how do you prove to regulators and customers that you're doing things right?
That's where compliance comes in. It's not just about checking boxes. It's about demonstrating that you're taking security seriously and meeting industry standards.
But there are so many regulations out there, GDPR, HPA, CCPA. It's a jungle. How do you even know where to start?
Take a deep breath. First, focus on the regulations that are most relevant to your industry and location. There are online tools that can help you assess your compliance posture and identify any gaps. And remember, you don't need to become a legal expert overnight.
So it's about being aware of the requirements, having a plan, and seeking expert help when you need it.
You got it. And here's the good news. By building strong security practices from the ground up, like we've been discussing, you're already on the path to compliance.
That's reassuring. It's all connected. But let's face it, even with the best security, sometimes things slip through the cracks. What happens when, despite all your efforts, there's a security incident?
That's where incident response comes in. It's not about if, but when something happens. And it's not about panicking. It's about having a plan.
Okay, I'm getting some serious fire drill vibes here.
Yeah.
So what are the key elements of a good incident response plan?
It needs to cover everything from detection to recovery. First, you need to realize something is wrong fast. That's where tools like Splunk are helpful, alerting you to unusual activity. Then, containment, isolating the affected systems to prevent the attack from spreading.
So like putting up a firewall around the damage?
Exactly. Then comes eradication, kicking out the attacker and cleaning up any mess they've made. And finally, recovery, getting your systems and your business back to normal as quickly as possible.
It's a whole process, not just a one-time fix. And this is something a CTO can handle.
Absolutely. A CTO doesn't need to be a forensic investigator, but they do need to understand the process, make sure there's a plan, and know who to call when things hit the fan.
This is a lot to take in, but it's really starting to paint a clear picture of how a CTO can build a security-first culture.
That's exactly what we want you to take away from this. It's about empowering CTOs to lead the charge on security, even without a dedicated CISO.
Wow, we've covered so much ground in part 2. From the nitty-gritty of tools like Terraform and Splunk to the bigger picture of risk assessment and incident response. But we're not done yet. In part 3, we'll explore even more advanced strategies, talk about the evolving threat landscape, and share some inspiring examples of companies that are doing security right. Stay tuned.
Welcome back to the final part of our deep dive. We've covered a lot of ground, from the basics of security by design to the nitty-gritty of tools and processes. Now, I'm curious about what comes after you've got the fundamentals in place. What are some of the more advanced strategies companies can adopt as they level up their security game?
That's a great question. You know, it's like you've built a solid house.
Yeah.
But now you're thinking about adding those extra layers of protection, like a security system, maybe even a moat with laser sharks.
Okay, maybe skip the sharks, but I get your point. So what's the security equivalent of that advanced protection?
Well, one key area is taking threat modeling to the next level. We talked about it earlier, but in mature organizations, threat modeling
isn't just a one-time exercise during the design phase.
Right.
It's an ongoing process woven into the entire development lifecycle.
So as you're building new features,
Yeah.
integrating with different systems, even just refactoring code,
Yeah.
you're constantly reevaluating the threat landscape.
Exactly. It's like having a security crystal ball, constantly looking for those emerging threats. You know it's proactive, not reactive.
Right.
You're not waiting for something bad to happen. You're anticipating it and building defenses in advance.
I like that proactive approach. What else is there in the advanced security playbook?
Another fascinating strategy is chaos engineering.
Chaos engineering. That sounds a bit, well, chaotic.
It might sound counterintuitive, but it's about making your systems more resilient by deliberately introducing failures and disruptions.
So you're intentionally breaking things to see how they hold up. That seems a little risky.
It's controlled chaos. You're simulating real-world failures in a safe environment to see where your weaknesses are. Imagine simulating a server crash or a network outage. How does your system respond? Do you have failover mechanisms in place? Can you recover your data?
Okay, so it's like a stress test for your systems, but with security in mind.
Right.
By breaking things on purpose, you're finding and fixing those weak points before an attacker exploits them.
Precisely. And it's not just about technical resilience. Chaos engineering can also help you test your incident response plans. Can your team actually handle a major outage or a cyber attack? Have you practiced enough? It's one thing to have a plan on paper,
right,
but it's another thing to see it in action under pressure.
That's a great point. It's about preparedness and building confidence in your ability to handle whatever comes your way.
Yeah.
So threat modeling and chaos engineering, those are pretty sophisticated strategies. Anything else a company can do to really up their security game?
As you mature, security automation and orchestration are key. We've talked about automation, but orchestration takes things to the next level. Imagine connecting all those automated tasks like security scans, patching, incident response into seamless workflows.
So instead of having a bunch of separate tools and scripts running independently,
right,
you're creating an interconnected security ecosystem.
Exactly. This can dramatically improve your efficiency and effectiveness. Imagine this. A developer commits some code. Your automated system runs a security scan. If a vulnerability is found, a ticket is automatically created, assigned to the right person, and maybe even a patch is suggested or automatically applied.
Wow, that takes all the manual work out of it. It's like having a security robot taking care of those tedious but essential tasks, freeing up your team to focus on the bigger picture. And that brings us to something you touched on earlier, security as a competitive advantage.
Absolutely. In a world where data breaches are becoming more and more common, security is no longer just a cost of doing business.
Right.
It's a way to differentiate yourself, to build trust with your customers, and to gain a competitive edge.
So it's about turning security from a necessary evil into a selling point.
Exactly. Think about it. If you're a customer choosing between two companies and one has a reputation for rock-solid security while the other has had a string of data breaches, who are you going to trust with your data?
That's a no-brainer. And with regulations like GDPR that impose hefty fines for data breaches, strong security can actually save you a lot of money in the long run. But let's face it, the threat landscape is constantly changing. New vulnerabilities are discovered, new attack techniques emerge. How can companies stay ahead of the curve?
Constant learning and adaptation are key. One of the biggest trends I'm seeing is the rise of sophisticated, state-sponsored attackers.
Right.
These are not your average hackers. They have significant resources, expertise, and they're often motivated by political or economic goals.
Okay, so we're talking about professional cyber espionage. That's definitely a step up from a teenager trying to steal credit card numbers.
Yeah, it's a different ballgame altogether. Defending against these types of attacks requires a more strategic approach. You need to understand your threat model, who might be targeting you and why, and build your defenses accordingly.
So it's not just about having the latest security tools, it's about knowing your adversary and anticipating their moves, like a game of cyber chess.
Exactly. And another trend that's really changing the game is the use of artificial intelligence in cyber attacks.
Right.
AI can be used to automate attacks, making them faster and more effective. It can also be used to create more convincing phishing scams or to bypass traditional security controls.
So AI is both a weapon and a shield in the cybersecurity world.
Exactly. The good news is that AI is also being used by defenders.
Right.
AI-powered security tools can help you analyze vast amounts of data, detect subtle anomalies, and respond to threats more quickly than a human ever could.
So it's an AI arms race.
In a way, yes. But the key takeaway here is that security is a journey, not a destination. It's about continuous improvement, staying informed, and always being willing to adapt to the ever-changing threat landscape.
That's a fantastic point to end on. Throughout this deep dive, we've explored a comprehensive blueprint for building security into every aspect of product development. We've discussed everything from the foundations of security by design to advanced strategies like threat modeling, chaos engineering, and the use of AI. And we've emphasized that security is not just about technology. It's about people, processes, and creating a culture of security awareness.
Couldn't have said it better myself. And remember, you don't have to do it all at once. Start with the basics, build a solid foundation, and then keep learning, adapting, and improving.
That's all the time we have for today's deep dive. We hope you found this exploration insightful and empowering. Remember, security is everyone's responsibility, and by working together, we can create a safer and more secure digital world. Go out there and build amazing secure products.